Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2027. The topic is training, and the title is The Best Quad-Focused Squat Variations. The variations I'm going to be talking about are going to be in today's topic, specifically addressing strength. We're going to talk about a powerlifter client. However, you could use these variations for muscle growth or any kind of like shaping, strengthening if you want to strengthen the quads for knee health. If you want to do a squat variation for quad growth, build the sweep. You can use these variations for other like growth outcome, performance outcome, whether you're an athlete or whatnot. But I am going to be talking about these in relation to powerlifting. I would just want anyone to know, if they're not a powerlifter, this is still useful to know. It's still good information. Now, today's topic came from a personal trainer I've been working with. They want to reach an elite total. Their goal is to do it in 2025. We're aiming for a show somewhere in the beginning of 2025. They want to get an elite total. They've been kind of tracking their process to grow their business, and that's been fun for them, and they want to then use the elite title as a way to promote their business. And then they're also using it as motivation to be more consistent with their training and nutrition. They recently made a job change, and now they're doing personal training fully 100% as like their career, and they train people in person. They're using social media to try to grow the business, but they have felt a pressure since switching to the business being full-time that initially when they changed, they felt like their own training and worrying about their own food was selfish and was maybe costing them money, either in lost opportunity or in actual cost. So they went through a phase where they weren't consistent with their training. It was negatively impacting their health, but mostly their emotional and mental health. And their spouse said, hey, I understand why you're doing that, but this isn't good. This isn't long-term. Lifting weights is what you love. You need to get back to doing what you love. So they talked a little bit, they crunched some numbers, and they ended up hiring me. So I feel incredibly honored, very blessed that people trust me with their journey, and I am excited to help him continue to progress. Now, we've been working together for a couple months. We've already seen progression. He's already happy. But I thought it was interesting to note that a personal trainer was struggling with motivation to train, and not because of lack of desire, just they felt it was selfish and maybe a cost thing. So it's interesting. Like working with so many people, you do start to see a lot of the ways in which humans kind of beat ourselves up, and it can be pretty rough. So I'm glad he has a good support system that kind of helped push him out of that funk. Now, in order for him to reach an elite total, he has a decent bench. He has a really good deadlift, actually. But his squat was the thing that was always holding him back. What was interesting when I was watching his videos is his body is very average. Now, I told him this in much better words, so he's not going to feel offended if he listens to today's podcast, which I hope he does. But what I mean by average isn't that he doesn't have muscularity and leanness. I mean body limb lengths. And what this refers to is he doesn't have short femurs, which is the upper leg bone. If somebody has short femurs, they're able to maintain a more uprighted torso position in their squat, and they tend to just be better squatters as an initial strength base due to the better position. Or somebody will have a really short torso, like their midsection, the distance between their ribs and their hips are like non-existent, and it'll be incredibly small distance, and then that means even if they do have to bend over, like hinge at the hips, and have a pretty tilted torso, they're still going to be pretty strong because the lever arm, the distance from the hip to the bar, is relatively short. Ed Cohen would be a good example of that, where he had a shorter midsection, and that meant that the bar wasn't as far away from his hips. Like if you measured from, say, tailbone to the barbell, that was a shorter distance than somebody with a longer torso. And if you have a longer torso, the longer lever arm, the harder it's going to be on the muscles to maintain stiffness and rigidity in that lever arm. And then it's going to be harder to get that lever arm back uprighted, which you need to have for the top of the squat. So his leverages were normal, and that was kind of hurting him. One of the things that I saw in his videos that kind of continued to further this as proof that his quads were the issue was his technique. Is as he would come out of the bottom, he would drop to the bottom, pretty good position overall, a little bit of forward drift, but mostly a pretty good bar path. As soon as he would start to try to come up, his knees would shift back, his shins would become totally vertical, hips would shoot back, and that caused his torso to actually angle further towards the floor. And then he was doing basically a good morning from there. What we found was as he was loading more and more weight, that became more and more and more exaggerated. What this means is his body was trying to avoid loading the quads. The body was choosing to load the glutes and lower back more. That also makes sense given that his deadlift is very strong. The body trusted those muscles more. Those muscles could handle more of the stimulus. This meant that in his squats, basically as soon as he'd start to come out of the bottom, knees would shoot back, hips would shoot back, torso would angle further to the floor. He would maybe come up 2 or 3 inches, but the bottom half, like the bottom of the mid-range of the squat, he would just die. Completely flatten out, drop, miss everything. And this meant that his quadriceps were weak. That was then confirmed when I asked him if he ever did front squats. And he said, not often. And I was like, well, what do you do for like a 1 rep max, or what would be a heavy weight you would use for like 3 to 5 reps for front squats? And he replied, I honestly don't know. And I said, well, have you ever done safety squat bar? He's like, nope. I was like, well, have you done high bar squats? His reply was, my coach told me that wasn't good for me. And I was like, oh, okay. So we know our quads are weak, but your old programming never had you do quad focused things. And he said, no, like we did leg press. And I was like, oh. So his old programming would be low bar back squats, and the coach never had him not do low bar back squats. I'm not sure how long they were working together, but I believe it was at least 6 to 9 months, if not longer than that. Actually, it's probably longer than that. I just looked back at his training that far. And the programming was just kind of basic foam rolling warm-ups, and then low bar back squat all of the time. And I asked him, I said, did you have a hard time understanding like technique right away? Was that one of the reasons why you stayed with low bar back squat? He's like, no, like I'm pretty good at technique. And I was like, okay. So it didn't really make sense that the coach only had him low bar back squat all of the time. I mean, like I said, for 9 months or so, never mixing anything in there a little bit different. Ugh, surprise. So after they would low bar back squat, they would do leg press. And his program just said leg press. There was no tutorial video. There was nothing. It was just leg press. So he chose to do a low, narrow stance on the leg press because he felt like that better targeted his quads. And he said, well, I knew that my glutes and hamstrings were getting work in my deadlifts, and my glutes and hamstrings can't really be worked well in a leg press, meaning they're not going to be the dominant drivers, because I didn't want to work on a wide stance to work on my adductors because I have a relatively narrow stance in my squats anyhow. I'm not worried about my knees caving in or caving out, sticking out excessively. He's like, I wasn't really having problems with any of that. So I just chose what felt like very quad focused, which was great. I'm glad he did that. That was a smart move. And then they would do hyperextensions and leg curls. And for like the 6 months I saw, that was literally all they did. It was just variable rep ranges. So the back squats would be sometimes sets of like 5 to 6 at certain percentages. Then it would be sets of 3 to 4 at certain percentages. Then sets of 1 to 2 at certain percentages. Then he would cycle back through that. But it was always leg press, and it would be sets of 16 to 20. Then the next program was 10 to 14. The next program was like 6 to 10 with pauses. Then it was always hyperextensions and leg curls, and those were always variable. But for basically 6 months and longer, that was all his coach had him do, was low bar back squats, leg press, hyperextensions, and leg curls. Good God, not good. So nothing would have isolated his quads well and forced them to grow without the stronger muscles being able to protect them. What this means is, typically, his quads would have gotten to a degree of fatigue, but never maxed out. Before the quads were truly exposed, the body would start to help with other muscles because it wasn't forced into a position in which the other muscles couldn't help even if they wanted to. Think of a hack squat. A hack squat, if you don't know what a hack squat is, can you please pause the podcast and look up what's called a linear hack squat? That would be a good variation. I have an old Magnum variation. You can look up like an Arsenal hack squat or a Nebula hack squat. Those would be good variations of hack squats to see. It's essentially just a rigid pathway that you have to use your quads. There's no way to shift your hips back because they're slammed against a pad. Another machine would be a true squat. If you ever find a true squat in a gym, good luck to you. It's an excellent machine, but is that humbling. Holy crap. So there are certain machines that force the quads to do all of the work because really nothing else can help. The idea of using a squat-focused variation, a quad-focused squat variation, there we go, is to emphasize more work into the quads with a very minimal ability for other muscles to help. His coach never had him do that. He never did that in his own training. So those muscles just never got fully exposed. Anytime they were near failure, the other muscles would chime in and help. The benefit of being more focused and more isolated into the quads is you can drive them further into failure and get a better adaptation stimulus for greater growth demand. So he was essentially only ever squatting to about, let's say like 80-90% of what the quads could do. Probably more towards 90% of what the quads could do. But he was never really isolating and forcing and just overly demanding the quads to grow. So in his program, we are now been blending in. I had him start with front squats, and we've played around with some safety squat bar and stuff, but we're blending that in now. He's having fun learning those things and developing the technique and position awareness for those lifts. He's already seen a major benefit actually in a couple ways. He's seen a benefit in how his squats feel. He's not seeing that knee shift and hip shift back immediately. He's able to maintain a positive torso angle coming out of the bottom, meaning his chest doesn't angle further towards the floor as he comes out of the bottom. He's also already hit some PRs in deadlift because now we're not destroying his lower back and glutes in our squat days. He's now coming into his deadlift days fresh, and he's actually hit some PRs already. So super happy with that for him. That's been going really well. And what I wanted to share in today's podcast was common quad-focused squat variations that I use for clients and the modifications that I would make for those to make them even better. So if we look at some basic examples, I'm going to just do 3 categories today, is safety squat bar, front squats, and high bar squats. Those are 3 variations of quad-focused squats that are awesome if you want to build up your quads. Absolutely. And like I said, that could be for strength, that could be for muscle growth, that could be for athleticism. Like stronger quads can help you with sprint efforts. I've helped some Olympic level BMXers, and we would do a lot of quad-based stuff to help them with like sprint effort out of the starts. So there's athletic applications to stronger quads for sure. So the 3 variations we're going to look at today are safety squat bar, front squats, and high bar squats. Now, safety squat bar is the one out of these 3 that I see just absolutely destroyed technique-wise, where people will miss the point of what the safety squat bar is helping you do. The way in which people do the safety squat bar incorrectly is they overload it, way too damn heavy, and as they come out of the bottom, their upper back rounds over, and their hips kind of tuck under them, and their upper back is rounded, and then they kind of finish the lift by upraising their torso. So they'll go down, and then on the way up, their butt tucks under them, their upper back is rounded, they extend the quads some, and then they straighten back out their thoracic spine. Horrible. Not the way that safety squat bar is meant to be used. That actually negates some of the benefit of the safety squat bar is it shifts some of the stress out of essentially the position that you're going to need it in. So you are going to target more of your quads, and your thoracic spine will be sore. But it doesn't mean you're growing the tissues in the correct pathway. So one of my clients, a different client, was doing safety squat bar recently, and I wrote a note to him on his technique that I thought would be good to share in today's podcast. So I wrote to him is good work, because he sent me a couple videos. So I said thoracic control is very good. It's on the edge of rounding and may even be rounding slightly. But you're doing a great job of keeping the chest up as you come up from the bottom. So he's starting to have a little bit of that upper back rounding. So when I say thoracic rounding, it's the thoracic spine, which is the T-spine. It's the area around your shoulder blades. So you would see their shoulder blades kind of spread apart and round over. Think of somebody with bad posture. Their shoulders are kind of slumped forward. We don't want to be squatting with that slumped forward shoulder positioning. So I wrote to him these are very different than a low bar squat in the sense of how they're going to feel as you come out of the bottom of the squat. So when you're doing a safety squat bar correctly, one thing you want to focus on is do not manipulate the bar position with your hands. The handles of the safety squat bar are there for you to help maybe balance the weight a little bit as you do walkouts or walk-ins. It's more so meant as just somewhere to put your hands and a light guide if needed. Do not push up on the handles of the safety squat bar as you come out of the bottom. Sure as hell don't pull down on them. That's not going to help anything. But you'll see people do that. They'll push up on the bar as they're coming up. And that makes it easier on the thoracic spine, but you don't have the ability to push up on a regular barbell in a squat, in a typical competition squat. So it's improper to use your hands. You do not want to pull or push on the handles of the bar in a safety squat bar. I choose, when I do safety squat bar variations, I have a Kabuki transformer bar, which I really love because it has a lot of variable positions. I will do, it's hard to do on a podcast. Instead of wrapping my fingers around the handle, I have my fingers curled, but I put my hands and my palms on the outside of the handles, but I don't curl my fingers around the handle. So I'm just kind of like pressing my hands against the handles on the outside. I'm not wrapping my fingers all the way around. And that forces me to not be able to help with hand use because I have no manipulation of the bar at that point. So I want him to think of, and I would want you to think of, do not do anything with your hands. And then, as you come out of the bottom with a safety squat bar, it's going to be odd in the sense of what you have to think of in order to maintain proper position. As you're coming out of the bottom, you actually want to think about driving your knees forward, pushing your belly button forward, and driving your rib cage upwards. So you get to the bottom of the squat. As you're going to start to come up, you drive your knees forward, belly forward, and chest up. That is the proper kind of feelings that you're going to search for coming out of the bottom of a safety squat. Because the bar is trying to do the opposite of that. The bar is trying to fold your shoulders forward and downward. So you're trying to lift your rib cage in the opposite direction, which would be upward. In order for your rib cage to be able to go upward best, you also want to be able to drive your knees and belly button forward. It's going to be a more exaggerated feeling than what you would need in a competition squat, especially if you do low bar squats. But that's the point. The point is that you have to overemphasize those cues, which then allows you, when you move to a low bar squat, to absolutely smoke those cues. Because if you can do those cues with a safety squat bar, you're going to destroy those cues when you get to a regular barbell. So I thought that would be helpful to kind of read through what I was telling that client. And they were doing a great job, and they're kind of playing with that fine edge of how heavy is too heavy. So I said great job to them for choosing the weight that they are choosing. But to continue to be mindful of those technique concepts is, once you hit the bottom, drive your knees forward, belly button forward, and rib cage up. So that's how we do the safety squat bar better. No hands and all of those technique aspects. Now, if we're looking at a front squat, I really like front squats. They're wonderful. Most people hate them. And part of the reason why they hate them is they use a regular barbell, like a standard Olympic bar. And one of the negatives of that is the bar can roll on your kind of arms and shoulders. Now, depending on your muscularity level, you might have enough muscle in your shoulders, specifically the front and middle delts, the deltoids, the shoulders, that it can help cradle the bar, where the bar sits kind of over your collarbones, and the front shoulder muscle is actually in front of the bar. So the bar isn't going to really roll because it would have to go up over the shoulder muscles. If you don't have big enough shoulder muscles, that's not going to help you then, and the bar can feel like it can roll anywhere. Typically, when I'm working with people for powerlifting, some people can do a front rack position, which you would see in Olympic lifting. That's not as common in powerlifting. Sometimes they can't because tight lats, tight forearms, all the tight stuff. Then they'll do an arms crossed position, but that then kind of risks bicep cramps, and it's not uncommon to have people have a severe cramp in their bicep, which then messes us up for bench pressing for a couple weeks. So I'm not a big fan of either of those positions. So the variations that I like to use is if I have to use a straight bar, I'm going to do a zombie squat. A zombie squat is your arms are just stuck straight out in front of you. Think of like how a mummy walks or a zombie walks with their arms out in front of them. And you just have the bar on your shoulders, and that's the way it is. So you don't have your hands on the bar at all. Your arms are just straight out in front of you. You can angle your arms a little bit upward, and that helps keep the bar pinned back into the collarbones. That is a fantastic squat because if you lose thoracic positioning in any way and your arms lower, the bar will want to roll away from you, or you'll want to you'll lose the bar. So you're very, very, very sensitive in that position to any positional negative change. So great squat. The downside is that can be a quite underloaded squat variation for some people. So I can have somebody, like maybe a female, that can squat 330, and she might be zombie squatting only like 225. So it's an underloaded variation. If I have somebody who's not super strong, I don't really want to use underloaded variations, at least not that extreme of an underload, because then the weight load actually might be too light to really be super beneficial. So if they're struggling to squat mid 200s, I give them a zombie squat and they can only do like 155. 155 divided among all the lower body muscles is kind of like worthless. It's not really going to develop a lot of tissue. So I wouldn't want to use a zombie squat because it's too underloaded of a variation. So then the change you can make is to use a bar that doesn't roll. This would be a Buffalo bar or a Duffalo bar by Chris Duffin of Kabuki Strength. I know Rogue now makes their cambered, I forget what it's called, but they make a Duffalo variation. It's a badass looking bar. I've gotten to use it once. Love it. It's a fantastic bar. I have the Duffalo. So that, it's a curved barbell. So it won't roll because it's curved. Another option would be to use a cambered bar. My dad is amazing, really good at welding, so he made me a camber bar. You can buy them, pretty much any, like Titan Fitness has one. I think Rep Fitness has one. Rogue has one, I'm sure. But a camber bar is the bar that you typically have across your back. It's where it is. But then where the weights would normally sit, actually the weights are lowered about 14 inches, and then they sit down there. So it doesn't look like a straight line. It looks, just Google it. It essentially what happens is the weights of the bar hang lower than where the bar actually contacts your body. So therefore, again, the bar doesn't roll. If you use a non-rolling bar, like Buffalo, Duffalo, camber bar, those things, I know a Bully bar, if you have one of those from Westside Barbell, but those bars, they're not going to roll, and then therefore they're more secure. So you can do the arm folded position, you can do a front rack position, you can put some wrist straps and attach those to the bar, then hold those out in front of you. You have a lot more arm options, and it's not so stressful in the arms because the bar isn't rolling anywhere anyhow. So that is some modifications on how you can make a front squat better, is to do the zombie variation or use a non-rolling barbell, which would be a Duffalo, Buffalo, Camera Bar, Bully Bar, those kind of things. Then the third variation that I'll commonly use in programming is a high bar squat. So just a good old-fashioned high bar squat. Now, to make that more quad-focused and to make it a little bit better, I'll have clients use Olympic lifting shoes. By raising the heel, that pushes the knees out further past the toes. That's a great stimulus for the quadriceps down by the knees. And then we also do a paused variation where they'll come down and they don't sit into a stretch. And that's very important, is when you do a pause squat, you don't want to go to the bottom of a squat where you relax into full muscle extensions and like you're sitting in the connective tissue basically. You want to maintain muscular responsibility for the position. So you lower down, you pause right before you're about to lose muscular control, muscular responsibility essentially, and then you contract and fire back up to the top. And those are absolutely wonderful. That's great variation, awesome, very helpful, especially if somebody has the anatomy that allows them to play with a high bar squat, even if they do low bar squat in competition. So that's a good variation as well. So those are 3 variations that I would use for a strength-based client. And again, you could use these for bodybuilders if you wanted. I don't use these actually very often for bodybuilders. Typically, if we're going to do a squat, I'll have them do like a Smith machine, or we'll do like a squat variation of a machine. I do have bodybuilders do back squats from time to time, just not on a regular basis, just typically because the wear and tear and the demand of that lift is pretty extreme. So it really limits a lot of the volume that you can do to develop muscles and fullness in other areas of the legs. So I use it from time to time, but not as much as you would use for like a strength athlete. So safety squat bar, and then the way we make that better is no hands and the proper technique of knees forward, belly button forward, rib cage up. Front squats, and how we make that better is zombie squat, Duffalo bar, Camera Bar, non-rolling bar. And then high bar squats, how we make that better is Olympic lifting shoes and a pause. Cool. Now, these are all going to be better used and best used in like building phases of your programming. So you're not going to do this the 4 weeks right into a competition. So you're going to do this away from a competition. Typically, I'll do these up until about 8 to 12 weeks from the competition. And then I would switch to a competition style squat, do 4 weeks of kind of refining and relearning the technique. Then we do 4 weeks to push the CNS adaptation, where we're pushing at least one effort per workout to like a 9 RPE. We're doing some walkout holds. We're doing some really overloaded CNS work. And then you take 2 to 4 weeks to kind of peak that for the meet. Let them recover a little bit, let the CNS recover, and then all of a sudden they, boom, feel fresh, and they're ready to kill things at the power of the meet. So I thought that was fun to share the best quad-focused squat variations and then the ways in which you can make them actually more effective. If you want to check out our coaching services are, you can read about them on the website, www.brutalirongym.com. I work the most with one-on-one clients where I write their programming for both training and nutrition. We do weekly check-ins, video reviews, nutrition check-ins, all of it. All the details. So if you want everything in the kitchen sink, that's the service. So I would check that out if you're looking for that type of help, which is the type of help that's explained in the client experience in today's podcast. Awesome. Well, if you have any questions, you can also message me on the website. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form. You can contact me anytime with any questions or any suggestions you have for the podcast. And then if you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people we share it with, the more people we can help. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.